There is a reason the compass inside you spins without pointing anywhere true. You have chased every sunrise, every affirmation, every bright promise of becoming whole, yet the emptiness crawls back each night like tidewater. Carl Jung warned that what you seek in the heights is forever anchored to what you dread in the depths, and that the deeper law of the soul is not ascent but circulation. Whatever you exile returns disguised as fate. When he wrote Nox Tertia in the Red Book, Jung was not delivering a polite lecture on self-improvement. He was howling from the interior of his own abyss, gripping the bars of what he called the despicable prisoner, the lowest, most decomposed fragment of self the polished ego refuses to touch. He discovered that the longer we keep that prisoner locked away, the more violently it drags our compass off course. If you still feel lost, it is because that prisoner has not yet been granted audience. Imagine the psyche as an abandoned cathedral, its stained glass saints shattered, its nave echoing with footsteps you cannot see. By daylight you tour the ruins, collecting broken colors and telling yourself you are rebuilding. But at dusk, precisely when the cathedral should bloom with candlelight, you find the crypt sealed, fumes of something ancient leaking through the stone, humming an inarticulate grief. We call that gloom bad luck, depression, anxiety, self-sabotage. Jung called it the shadow, everything unlived, unspoken, unclean. And above the crypt door a newer inscription is etched: "Here dwells the God who torments the spirit through the flesh." This is not the gentle savior who heals. This is the dark revealer who wounds, because scar tissue is the only parchment the soul bothers to reread. Jung's darkest teaching is ruthless in its simplicity. You are not lost by accident. You are lost on schedule. Every detour, every heartbreak, every relapse into the very habit you swore to bury is a summons. You stay disoriented because orientation would let you evade the appointment. As long as you imagine that healing is a ladder straight to the light, the shadow has full permission to pull you sideways into labyrinthine corridors. Once there, the ego cries, "Why again? Why me?" And the shadow simply replies, "Because you skipped class the first 1,000 times." Listen to Jung confess in his private notebook, "Salvation is a long descent through strange streets." He does not promise angelic choirs at the bottom, only contact, raw and electric, with what festers. The moment the outer world collapses into chaos, financial ruin, betrayal, illness, most people sprint for an exit. Jung's map points the opposite direction, through the ruins, past the rancid air until your eyes adjust to underground light. There, in the dim granary of forgotten selves, waits the figure you abandoned at the exact moment society first rewarded you for being respectable. Perhaps you remember the day you bit your tongue so classmates wouldn't laugh, the night you hid your desire so a lover wouldn't leave. Each act of self-amputation kept you functional, but the amputated parts began convening in that crypt, grafting together into a mythic creature made of instincts, griefs, and forbidden hungers. It mutters now in dreams, stirs during panic attacks, flashes behind your eyes every time you scroll past news of war or famine and feel a confused, guilty thrill. You are lost because that creature is your unspoken coordinate system, and until you kneel beside it, compass needles will spin. Jung recorded a vision. He descends into a filthy cellar and finds a rotting corpse. As he turns away in revulsion, blood blossoms into red roses, and the stench becomes incense. Interpret it literally, and it reads like madness. See it symbolically, and it becomes the secret architecture of renewal. Decay is not the enemy of growth, it is the mulch. If you refuse to rot, you refuse to bloom. The psyche, like soil, must digest its dead before anything green can rise, yet modern spirituality sells you chlorophyll without compost, promising perpetual spring while burying the worms. Small wonder you are still wandering winter fields in June. There is a sharper edge to Jung's message. He warns that the shadow will not stay passive. Locked away long enough, it develops claws. Then, instead of appearing as a private sadness, it erupts onto the stage of history as collective psychosis. Whole nations project their disowned hunger onto scapegoats. Wars ignite, and ideologues preach purity while rivers run red. If you feel vaguely responsible for the world's madness, you are. Your private cellar feeds the public inferno. The only ethical act is intimate archaeology. Descend, reclaim, integrate. Or, as Jung put it, The world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. So how, practically, do you answer the summons? First, abandon the fantasy of becoming a shining hero who slays the dragon. In Jung's cosmology, you are the dragon, scales blackened by forgotten fire. Integration is not conquest, it is conversation. Sit in silence and let the prisoner speak in its own vulgar tongue. Write the obscene sentence you've never dared to finish. Dance the ugly dance your body secretly remembers. Tell the truth that makes your jaw tremble. Ritualize it. Give the shadow a chalice of ink, a canvas of scream, a drumbeat time to your pulse. The moment you pierce the varnish of self-image, the labyrinth walls shift. You begin to sense direction not as a map, but as magnetism. The crypt no longer repels. It draws you with gravitational inevitability. And then, the paradox, as you go under, you rise. Because the descent is not linear, it is spiral. You circle the same wound from deeper vantage points until the wound becomes a window, and suddenly, the darkness you feared is luminous with texture, detail, life. Jung observed that the psyche splits because it cannot hold opposites. Integration is the furnace where opposites melt and cast new alloys. Shadow and light, flesh and spirit, despair and meaning, they blend until categories dissolve. At that threshold, the old god of moral bookkeeping dies, and a new god is born, one who torments the spirit through flesh not out of cruelty, but to tattoo wisdom directly onto skin. You will know you have met this god when ordinary moments become oracular. The coffee cup cracks in your hand, and its jagged rim feels like déjà vu. A stranger's laugh on the subway reminds you of someone you buried at 16. The smell of rain on asphalt sounds like a hymn you never learned. These are not coincidences. They are the shadow's newly acquired vocabulary, teaching you to read reality as commentary on your interior. Lose that fluency and you wander again. Maintain it, and every pothole, every billboard, every insult, hurled in traffic becomes a breadcrumb guiding you back to center. Yet, do not romanticize the process. Integration is less a triumph than a bloodletting. You will mourn versions of yourself that cannot survive contact with truth. You will lose friends who preferred this diluted you. Your career may stall because your resurrected integrity refuses to dabble in half-truths. This is the cost, and it must be paid in full. Jung wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." If the quote feels lofty, remember, roots drill through rot, sewage, and bone. Heaven is financed by hell's compost. Still, in that chaos, amid the rot and the rattle of everything you once believed, you begin to notice something else, a presence, not divine in the traditional sense, not omnipotent or omniscient, but watching, not judging, just witnessing. It is the part of you that remained hidden behind the masks, buried beneath the persona, untouched by achievements or failures. Jung called it the self, the organizing center of the psyche that unites all opposites and waits patiently beneath the rubble of who you think you are. When you descend into the shadow and meet the prisoner, when you finally offer your light not to destroy it, but to sit beside it, that self awakens. It does not speak in words. It does not rush to rescue. It only makes its presence known by a strange warmth, a gravity, a stillness inside you when everything else is trembling. You begin to feel as though you are no longer pretending to be alive. You are no longer an actor on the stage of your own biography. You are breathing for the first time in the actual architecture of your being. But the ego resists. It will tell you that you're being dramatic, that this inner death is indulgent, that you should get back to normal, that success is waiting just beyond the next to-do list. But Jung's warning was clear. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that avoidance is what keeps the modern soul fragmented, succeeding by day, drinking by night, scrolling to silence the ache and wondering why no amount of progress ever feels like arrival. To truly encounter the self, you must move beyond performance. You must give up trying to be spiritual, enlightened, productive, or perfect. The self does not care about your resume or your virtue. It does not speak the language of goals. It lives in symbols, patterns, and paradoxes. It is both serpent and dove, both grave and cradle. It is what survives after your most sacred beliefs collapse. And it is what waits, always, on the other side of your deepest betrayal. This is what Jung meant by holding the tension of the opposites. You do not resolve the contradiction by choosing light over dark, good over evil, reason over chaos. You sit in the contradiction. You allow it to burn you. You let it melt away everything you used to cling to for certainty. And in that unbearable fire, a new form begins to emerge, one that can contain contradiction without collapsing, one that can love without needing to be loved back, one that can walk into the unknown without demanding a map. If this sounds like madness, remember, Jung believed madness was often the beginning of healing, not the end. In the Red Book, he writes about being led into the underworld, about speaking to gods and corpses, about losing his mind, and in doing so, regaining his soul. He did not pathologize the descent. He sanctified it. He recognized that to find order in the psyche, one must first dissolve the false order imposed by culture, by religion, by personality. The lostness is not a glitch, it is the call. And yet, this descent is not only for poets and prophets, it is for you. It is for the tired father who wonders why his success feels hollow, for the lonely woman who can't explain why every relationship leaves her emptier than the last, for the anxious teenager whose panic attacks are not a disorder, but a message from the parts of himself he hasn't yet dared to meet. You are not broken. You are being summoned, and that summons will sound like failure, emptiness, disorientation, until you realize it is the voice of your forgotten self, clawing its way back to the surface. Jung's most terrifying insight was not that we all carry darkness, it was that we are most lost when we deny it. He warned that the greatest danger lies not in the monster under the bed, but in the pristine persona that insists everything is fine, the smiling face, the curated life, the "I'm okay" that hides 1,000 unspoken screams. When you finally stop pretending, when you admit that you're lost, fragmented, haunted, that is when the real work begins. And that work is not glamorous. It is slow, painful, often invisible. It requires long nights with no epiphany, ugly truths spoken into silence, patience with your own regression. It requires you to be both midwife and mourner to the person you used to be, to bury the mask with reverence, not shame, to light a candle at the grave of your illusions and say, "Thank you for protecting me, but I don't need you anymore." Only then does the prisoner begin to transform, not into a saint or a savior, but into an ally, a wild, dangerous ally who teaches you how to live without pretending, who teaches you how to feel rage without becoming cruel, how to feel grief without drowning, how to feel joy without clinging. The parts of you that once threatened to destroy your life become the fuel for a new kind of aliveness, one that no longer depends on applause, validation, or control. You begin to realize that being lost was never the problem. The problem was thinking that lostness was a sign of failure rather than a sacred invitation. You were never meant to follow someone else's map. You were meant to burn the map, descend into the wild, and carve your own path by walking it. And in the end, Jung leaves us with the one truth we spend our lives trying to avoid. The way to yourself is always through the place you least want to go. That is why you're still lost, and that is exactly where you need to begin. You must understand something Jung realized in agony. The psyche is not a straight hallway of progress, it is a spiral staircase, descending first into what feels like regression, confusion, even insanity. The mistake most people make, the mistake that keeps them lost, is to interpret this descent as failure. But it is not failure, it is initiation. There is no transformation without disorientation, no clarity without breakdown, no revelation without rupture. This is what no one tells you when you begin the path of inner work. The moment you truly begin to awaken, your life might get worse, at least on the surface. People leave, dreams die, your nervous system resists, your identity no longer fits like it used to, and everything in your life starts asking, "Are you sure you want this? Are you sure you're ready to meet who you really are?" Jung called this phase enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. Joy becomes despair, control becomes chaos. But if you endure the turning, if you surrender instead of resisting, something hidden awakens, a stillness that no longer depends on what direction life is spinning. It is not peace as absence of suffering. It is peace that includes suffering and still says, I am here. The world will always offer you ways to avoid this descent. Entire industries are built on bypassing it. You can numb it with substances, drown it in productivity, suppress it through performance. But the deeper intelligence of the psyche has time. It waits. If it must, it waits a decade. If it must, it waits until your third divorce, your second panic attack, your first existential collapse. And when you're ready, or too tired to run anymore, it opens the crypt again and whispers, now. And when you finally step into that crypt, what do you see? A ruined self, a feral image, an old memory with blood still on its hands, the things you've never admitted, the cries you silenced, the childhood grief you disguised as ambition. All of it is there, perfectly preserved, not because the psyche wants you to suffer, but because the soul remembers everything you try to forget. This is what Jung meant when he wrote that the self is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. You cannot outgrow your past. You must absorb it. You cannot destroy the parts of you that once lied, cheated, betrayed, or begged. You must lift them from the floor and say, you too belong here. This is not easy work. It's not the kind of healing that gets you applause. It's the kind that leaves you weeping in silence because you've realized the person I hated the most was the part of me that needed love the most. To accept this is to begin the real alchemy. You stop trying to fix yourself and start trying to listen. You stop trying to escape your old stories and begin rewriting them, not by erasing their pain, but by discovering the symbolic language hidden beneath them. That heartbreak at 20 wasn't just bad luck. It was the return of the rejected feminine. That job loss wasn't punishment. It was the collapse of the false masculine. That depression wasn't a diagnosis. It was the initiation rite into feeling. Jung believed that symbolic understanding was more important than happiness. The psyche doesn't want you to be happy all the time. It wants you to be whole. And wholeness includes despair, jealousy, guilt, rage, lust, apathy. These emotions are not your enemies. They are your teachers. Not because they are positive, but because they are true. You cannot evolve unless you can hear the full truth of your own inner world, no matter how uncomfortable. And that is precisely why most people stay lost, not because they haven't read enough or meditated enough, but because they're still trying to stay clean, still trying to rise without descending, still trying to find God in light instead of filth. But as Jung wrote, God becomes flesh only when man accepts the mud. This is perhaps his most blasphemous and most liberating teaching. The divine is not found by purifying yourself, but by embracing everything you thought you had to kill. God is not just the golden halo. God is the snake in the corner, the weeping child, the stuttering addict, the murderer in your dreams. Until you can say, this, too, is me, you remain fragmented. You remain lost. This is not to say that evil should be embraced. Jung never glorified darkness. He insisted that evil must be recognized, named, and held accountable. But to cast evil only outward, to deny your own capacity for harm, your own hidden shadows, is to remain blind. And blindness, Jung warned, is what gives evil its power. The integration of the shadow is not a moral failure. It is a moral imperative. You integrate so you don't project. You integrate so you don't destroy others in the name of your disowned self. You integrate so your pain no longer poisons your relationships. You integrate so the generations that come after you are not forced to carry the weight you refuse to feel. This is why Jung's teaching is so difficult, because it's not just about you. It's about the entire psychic field. Your personal descent contributes to the healing of the collective. Your decision to face your own demons makes the world less demonic. Every inner reconciliation becomes an outer ripple. This is not metaphor. This is psychic ecology. And your soul is part of that ecosystem, whether you want it to be or not. If you're still lost, it's not because you're weak. It's because your soul refuses to pretend anymore. It refuses to play along with a version of you that no longer exists. It's calling you inward, downward, homeward, not to destroy you, but to reunite you with what you abandoned long ago. Jung never claimed this path was safe. He said, you must let go of certainty and embrace the chaos of the soul. Only then will the self emerge, shining from beneath the ruins. The ruins, not the cathedral. not the mountaintop, but the ruins, the place you swore you'd never return to, the part of you that still bleeds when no one's watching, the memory you buried so deep you forgot it had a voice. That's where your compass is buried. That's where your true north is waiting. And when you finally stand in that place, among the broken idols and the forgotten selves amid the ash of your old identity, something strange happens. You no longer feel lost, not because you've been rescued, not because the pain is gone, but because you finally realize you were never meant to be anywhere else. This is where the real path begins, not in the light, but in the recognition that light and dark are not enemies. They are twins. They are the breath and the heartbeat. And to walk the true path is to walk the edge between them, not choosing sides, but becoming the bridge. Carl Jung did not offer a cure. He offered a mirror, a map, and a torch to take into the places that still scare you. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is the work. That is the price. And that is the freedom. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. And wholeness is forged in the fire of everything you once feared. So if you're still lost, let yourself be lost completely. Let the map burn. Let the voices fade. Let the ego weep. And then, listen. In that silence, beneath the noise, beyond the roles and regrets, you will hear it. A pulse, a voice, a presence. It is not far away. It is not coming tomorrow. It is not in a book, a guru, a title. It is you. It has always been you. The one who descended. The one who suffered. The one who remembered the forgotten. And now, the one who walks, not toward the light, but with it, into the darkness, with open eyes, and a compass that finally points home.